Today, I will tell you about the day my daughter-in-law pointed at me in front of hundreds of people, her champagne glass lifted high, and declared with a smile that cut sharper than any knife, "She's just a poor widow, a nobody." The hall erupted with laughter. It rolled across the ballroom like a wave, bouncing against the crystal chandeliers, echoing through every corner of that grand estate in New Haven. Guests leaned toward each other, smirking, as though they had just been handed permission to see me as less than human. They all laughed. Until her father gasped, his eyes wide with recognition, when he realized the truth of who I was. And every face around us turned pale. If you enjoy stories like this, remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is part of my Grandma Life Stories, where dignity, justice, and family truths always come to light. My name is Serena Carter. I live in a modest brick house in Providence, Rhode Island. To most people, I am just another middle-aged widow who shops at the grocery store with coupons and drives a reliable but unremarkable sedan. That is exactly how I wanted it. For years, I trained myself to be discreet, invisible even, so that no one would ever suspect what I carried inside. My late husband once told me that true strength is quiet, like the roots of a tree, unseen but holding everything steady. I believed him, and I lived that way. The Mitchell estate was nothing like my little home. When I arrived for my son's wedding, I was struck again by the sheer extravagance, rolling lawns that seemed to stretch forever, manicured gardens trimmed into perfection, a grand hall with crystal chandeliers glittering above. There was a string quartet rehearsing in the corner as guests floated in wearing gowns and tuxedos. The air was thick with wealth and the arrogance that often comes with it. I sat quietly in the second row, blending into the background in my navy blue dress, the one I had chosen precisely because it did not stand out. Clara, my new daughter-in-law, was radiant in her white gown. I will never deny that she looked beautiful. She had that glow of someone who knew the spotlight belonged to her. She had invited hundreds, making sure every corner of New Haven's high society was present. For her, this wedding was not just about marriage. It was a stage to perform the perfection she had been chasing all her life. I kept my eyes on my son Ethan, who smiled as if he had finally found happiness. That smile was all I wanted. I thought perhaps I could endure whatever coldness Clara carried, as long as my son felt joy. But life has a way of forcing truths into the open when we least expect it. When the reception began, champagne flowed like water. Guests filled the ballroom, the orchestra played softly in the background, and waiters moved swiftly with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I chose a small corner table, watching from a distance. It was enough for me to see my son dancing, laughing, glowing. Then Clara raised her glass. Her voice carried effortlessly across the hall, trained to charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here to celebrate this perfect union. I want to introduce you to my new family." She turned, her manicured hand pointing in my direction. The smile on her lips was sweet, but her eyes were sharp as glass. "This is just Serena, a poor widow, a nobody." For a moment, the world froze. Then came the laughter. Polite, uncomfortable at first, then spreading like ripples in water. Guests chuckled behind their glasses, exchanged knowing looks, and nodded as though the verdict had been given. I sat motionless, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My pulse was steady, my breath calm. Years of living unnoticed had taught me the power of silence. I sat still, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I had learned the art of silence long ago. It can be heavier than any shouted defense. My dress was plain navy blue, my jewelry nothing more than a string of old pearls I had inherited from my grandmother. That necklace had always been my quiet armor. People rarely noticed it, but those who did often remembered its unusual clasp, a small gold hinge in the shape of a rose. That night, Harold Mitchell noticed. At first, he laughed like everyone else, raising his glass in a shallow toast to his daughter's cruel joke. But then his eyes landed on me and lingered. His smile faltered. He leaned forward, squinting, his brows pulling tight. I watched confusion ripple across his face, then a flicker of recognition, sharp and sudden. His gaze dropped to my pearls, to the gold rose clasp glinting under the chandelier. I saw the moment memory struck him. His hand tightened on the stem of his glass. That necklace had once caught his attention in a boardroom years earlier during the sale of his collapsing company. He had dismissed me then as just a silent woman at the end of the table, someone merely watching while the lawyers and bankers spoke. But he remembered the pearls. He remembered the woman who sat so calmly while everything he had built was signed away. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand shook. The champagne flute slipped, shattering against the polished marble floor, the sound slicing through laughter like a blade. Golden liquid splashed at his feet, and in a hoarse whisper that carried through the sudden silence, Harold said, "Wait, aren't you the one who bought my company?" Every head turned. The room froze. Laughter died instantly, replaced by a suffocating quiet. Clara's smile faltered. Vivian's hand flew to her chest, and the orchestra stopped mid-note. Dozens of pale faces stared at me, their eyes wide with disbelief. That was the night they tried to bury me under ridicule, but instead uncovered a truth I had carried quietly for years. The night my daughter-in-law thought she could humiliate me was the very night I was finally recognized. And in that recognition, I began to live as myself again. The hall was frozen in silence after Harold's glass shattered against the floor. All eyes were on me, and for a moment I felt the weight of every stare pressing into my skin. My heart did not race, my breath did not falter. I had lived too long in shadows to be shaken by the cruelty of a single sentence or the recognition in a single man's eyes. Slowly, I rose from my chair. The murmur of voices began again, low and uneasy. People whispered to each other, glancing between Harold and me, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. I held my head high. My heels clicked against the marble as I stepped forward. The pearls at my neck caught the light of the chandeliers. I let my eyes sweep across the room, catching the expressions of the guests one by one. Some looked embarrassed for me. Some looked eager for scandal. Others looked wary, as though they were afraid to discover just how much they had misjudged me. A woman I barely knew leaned toward me as I passed. "Are you all right, Serena?" she asked softly, her face pinched with sympathy. I met her gaze and replied, "I am perfectly fine. Enjoy the rest of the evening." My voice was steady, sharper than the glass Harold had dropped. At another table, one of Ethan's college friends gave me a look of pity, as though I needed his comfort. I stopped, glanced at him, and said clearly, "Do not waste pity on someone who does not need it." His mouth snapped shut, his eyes wide. The orchestra sat still, instruments in hand, waiting for a signal to resume. No signal came. The air was too thick, too charged. Clara stood rigid by the center table, her smile frozen on her lips, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted left and right, her jaw tightened, her cheeks burned crimson. She wanted to scream, to deny, to laugh it off, but instead she stood in place, smiling that glassy smile as though her entire life depended on maintaining it. I reached the head table where Ethan sat. His face was pale, his eyes searching mine for answers. He whispered, "Mom, what did Harold mean?" His voice cracked with urgency. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, a small gesture to calm him. "Some truths are too heavy for a wedding night," I said quietly, each word clipped and deliberate. "Tonight is not the time." He blinked at me, unsettled, but he said nothing more. Clara shot me a glare sharp enough to cut steel. I ignored it. My time in that room had already ended. I turned back to the crowd, forcing myself to meet their eyes one last time. "Thank you for your kindness this evening," I said clearly, my voice ringing with control. "I wish you all a lovely night." Then I walked away. No hesitation, no apology, no shame. My steps echoed in the silence, a sound louder than any applause. The staff by the doors rushed to open them for me, their eyes lowered. The cool air outside the Mitchell estate hit my face like a wave, washing away the heavy perfume of money and arrogance that lingered inside. I exhaled slowly, my breath visible in the night air. I had survived humiliation many times in my life, but never before had I stood so calmly in the center of it. Tonight was different. Tonight I had chosen not to hide. Behind me, I heard hurried footsteps. "Mom, wait!" Ethan's voice rang out. He caught up to me on the gravel path, his tie loose, his hair falling out of place. His chest rose and fell quickly, as though he had been running for miles. "Please," he begged, grabbing my arm. "Tell me the truth. What did Harold mean? Why did he look at you like that? Everyone was staring. I don't understand." I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes that had once stared up at me when he was a boy, asking questions about the world I couldn't yet answer. I felt the same ache in my chest now. I wanted to protect him, but I knew protection had a cost. "Ethan," I said firmly, "you are married now. This was your night, and I will not poison it with stories too heavy for champagne and laughter." "That's not good enough," he snapped, his voice rising. "I saw his face. I saw yours. Tell me what's going on." I steadied my voice. "Some truths take time. Tonight, enjoy your wife, your friends, and the life you believe in. Tomorrow may look different, but tonight should be yours." His shoulders slumped. He let go of my arm, his hands trembling. "You're scaring me, Mom," he whispered. I brushed his cheek lightly with my hand, the way I had when he was small. "Then let fear make you strong. In time, you will understand." From the doorway behind us came the sound of Clara's laugh. It was too loud, too bright, too false. She was still inside, entertaining her guests as though nothing had happened. Her voice carried into the night. "Such a perfect evening," she cooed, though even from where we stood, I could hear the strain in her tone. Ethan turned toward the sound, his face torn. He wanted to go back to her, to play the part of loyal husband, to believe the performance she was staging inside that hall. I released him with a nod. "Go," I said quietly. "She needs you to stand there beside her. Do not let them see the cracks. Not yet." He hesitated, then whispered, "Will you be all right?" "I always am," I replied. He walked back toward the glowing lights of the estate, his figure swallowed by the open doors. I stood alone on the gravel, the cool wind wrapping around me. Inside, Clara smiled at her guests with painted confidence, her laughter ringing through the grand hall, her hands clenched beneath the tablecloth, her nails digging into her palms until they drew blood. She was humiliated, furious, and desperate to maintain the illusion. No one else noticed the way her jaw twitched, the way her eyes flickered with rage, but I noticed. She had shown her hand tonight, and I had seen it. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and started down the long driveway toward the car waiting for me. The night sky above New Haven was dark, moonless, heavy with clouds. Each step I took was measured, strong, deliberate. I was leaving behind the noise, the laughter, the lies. But I knew one thing with certainty. Tonight was not the end. The morning after the wedding, the red brick of my house in Providence glowed in the sharp light of dawn. I had not slept. My mind replayed every laugh, every whisper, every look from the night before. When Ethan arrived, his footsteps on the porch were fast, uneven. He pushed open the door without knocking, his face pale, his eyes dark with questions. "Mom," he said, his voice unsteady. "What happened last night? What did Harold mean? Why did he look at you like that? Tell me now." I gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table. My coffee was still untouched, cold in the mug. I folded my hands. "You want the truth. Then listen carefully. I will not say this twice." He sat heavily, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The anger in his eyes was sharp, but beneath it was fear. I took a deep breath and began. "Your father was an engineer, and so was I. We worked side by side for years in Silicon Valley, ignored by most, scraping by. Then he designed something no one else thought possible, a system that stretched the life of a lithium battery far beyond anything on the market. It was not glamorous. It was wires on a table, scraps of notes, sleepless nights. But it worked. That idea became a patent. In 2012, a company offered us more than $20 million to secure it. Ethan blinked, disbelief plain on his face. 20 million? You never told me. No, I cut him off, my tone sharp. We did not tell you, because money like that is a magnet for leeches, for envy, for ruin. We told you we had a settlement, just enough to live comfortably. That was the story we wanted you to believe. I pulled a leather folder from the cabinet and set it on the table. Inside were papers, deeds, investment records, contracts. He opened it with shaking hands. I studied, I continued. While raising you, while caring for your father as his health declined, I studied markets. I put money into solar when people said it was a fad. I bought wind farms in Maine when they looked like failures. I bought old warehouses in Providence that later became tech hubs. I did not gamble. I calculated that 20 million became 50, then 200. By the time your father passed away, our portfolio was worth more than 800 million. His mouth dropped open. 800? He stopped himself, shaking his head. All this time, you let me believe you were just a widow on a pension. You let me work nights. You let me break my back while you... I let you live, I snapped, my voice like steel. You earned your promotions, your home, your career. No one could say you were handed anything. If I had told you, every success you had would be questioned. Every friend would wonder what they could take from you. I did not raise you to be a spoiled heir. I raised you to stand on your own feet. He slammed the folder shut, his knuckles white. And Harold? What about him? Why did he nearly collapse when he saw you? I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on his. 3 years ago, Harold's company was drowning. Too much debt, too many reckless acquisitions. He thought he could charm the banks into saving him. He was wrong. I watched quietly, studied his books, and when the moment was right, I stepped in. Through a private trust, I bought every share. I rescued the company, not out of kindness to him, but because the bones were strong and the workers deserved better leadership. Harold stayed on as a consultant, never knowing the checks he cashed came from me. The night he looked at me, he remembered the pearls I wore in that boardroom, that clasp he saw again last night. That is why he gasped. Ethan's face turned ashen. So you own Mitchell Holdings. You own my wife's family's name. Yes, I said firmly. I do. And I have kept it quiet to protect you. Do you understand now why Clara looked at me the way she did? Why Vivian watches me with contempt? They think I am beneath them, but their wealth stands on my shoulders. He stood, pacing the kitchen, his hands raking through his hair. You lied to me for years. You let me marry into that family blind. You let me stand there while my wife humiliated you, while you held this power the entire time. I let you see the truth with your own eyes, I countered. Had I revealed this earlier, you might have doubted it. But last night, that was them, unfiltered. That was who they are, and now you cannot deny it. He turned back to me, his expression torn between fury and confusion. So what happens now? What are you planning? I opened another envelope and slid it across the table. Inside were photos, receipts, and reports I had already gathered. Clara has been busy. She has debts she hides. She opened credit lines in her name weeks before the wedding. She met with a private investigator to ask questions about me, about my assets. She is not with you for love, Ethan. She is with you because she thinks you are her path back to security. He stared at the documents, his hands trembling as he lifted each page. No, he whispered. That can't be true. She wouldn't. She already has, I said coldly, and you need to face it. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Ethan sank into the chair again, his face pale, his voice shaking. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me all this sooner? I met his eyes without flinching. Because I knew this day would come. I knew one day you would see what kind of woman Clara truly is. And when that day came, I needed you to recognize it for yourself. Now you have. He pressed his hands over his face, his breathing uneven. For the first time, I saw the weight of truth settling on him, dragging him into a storm he could not yet comprehend. And for the first time, I felt the battle lines forming, sharp and inevitable. Clara thought she was clever. No one in that kitchen suspected she had been standing at the doorway long enough to catch pieces of the truth. I saw only Ethan's pale face, his trembling hands as he sifted through the folder. I did not know then that Clara's shadow was lingering on the hall floor, that her ears were straining to pick out every word. She heard enough to ignite something poisonous. She waited until Ethan stormed upstairs, leaving me with silence, and then she slipped away. That evening, while I tried to bury myself in the quiet of my Providence home, Clara was already feeding her fury. She arrived at her parents' house, slamming the door behind her. The Mitchell estate still carried its grandeur, but even a casual glance revealed the rot, curtains fraying at the edges, polished floors that creaked beneath the weight of too many parties. The family name looked intact from a distance, but up close the cracks were everywhere. Clara hated those cracks. She had spent her whole life pretending they weren't there. Vivian sat in the drawing room, a crystal glass in her hand, though it was only 6 in the evening. She looked up as Clara entered, her daughter's face twisted with rage. "What's happened?" Vivian asked, her tone sharp. Clara paced the length of the room, her heels striking the hardwood like gunshots. "She's not who we thought she was. Serena. That woman. She has money, real money, more than we imagined." Vivian straightened, her eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" "I heard her tell Ethan. I heard everything. The patents, the investments, even the company." Clara stopped, swallowing her words, then hissed. "She bought Dad's company. She owns it, Mother. All this time she's been paying him like some pet consultant. She let us think she was nothing but a widow while she sat on a fortune." Vivian's fingers tightened around her glass until the crystal chimed. Her lips thinned. "If she has money, it should be part of the family." Clara froze, the words sinking deep into her chest. She turned toward her mother, anger shifting into resolve. "Exactly. She thinks she can humiliate me by hiding behind modest dresses and that ridiculous necklace. She let me mock her in front of everyone. She let me think I was above her. But she was laughing at me the whole time. That money, it belongs to us now, to me and Ethan, to our name." Vivian set the glass down, her eyes gleaming. "You cannot let her keep control. Do you understand? She will never hand it over willingly. Women like her, quiet, cunning, they are dangerous. But if you expose her, if you dig deep enough, you can force her hand. That fortune must return to where it belongs. This family was once respected. We will be respected again." Clara's voice sharpened, full of bitterness that had been festering for years. "Do you think I've forgotten what it was like when the bills piled up, when our so-called friends stopped calling? When people whispered that we weren't Mitchells anymore, just parasites living on memories? I swore I'd claw back everything we lost. And now the opportunity has landed in my lap." Vivian leaned forward, her tone urgent. "Then take it. Do not hesitate. Every day she stays in control is another day we are made fools of. That woman has mocked us with her silence for years. You must turn her secrecy against her." Clara nodded slowly, her mind racing, her chest heaving with the weight of her decision. She remembered the faces of the wedding guests, their laughter when she called Serena a nobody, and the silence that followed Harold's gasp. She felt the sting of humiliation all over again. Rage burned through her veins like fire. She had been played, and nothing enraged her more than being underestimated. "I will not let her win," Clara said, her words sharp as broken glass. "I will strip her secrets bare. If she thinks hiding makes her strong, she has no idea what I am capable of." Vivian smiled faintly, a cold expression that carried no warmth. "That's my girl. Do whatever it takes. Serena Carter will regret ever crossing our family." Clara turned to the window, staring out at the estate's lawn. She saw only shadows of what had once been, the expensive cars that had been sold, the servants long dismissed, the parties no longer hosted. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. She would not allow her life to shrink any further. That night, in her own room, Clara sat at her vanity, her reflection fractured by the light of a single lamp. She whispered to herself, "She has money. She thinks she can hide it, but I will take it. I will take everything. Her obsession was no longer a secret ambition. It had become her mission. What Vivian had planted grew quickly, watered by humiliation and greed. Clara's determination hardened into steel. While Ethan lay restless in the bed they shared, torn by the truth he had just learned, Clara's eyes remained wide open, burning with thoughts of strategy and conquest. Her mind was already calculating the first moves. Questions to ask, people to bribe, papers to uncover. She would dig until there was nothing left hidden. She told herself it was about justice, about reclaiming the dignity her family had lost. But in truth, it was about control. She had lived too long watching her life collapse around her. She would not watch anymore. She would fight, even if it meant destroying the woman who had quietly held the power all along. That was the night Clara stopped being simply a new bride. That was the night she became my opponent. ChatGPT said, "The morning after Clara's resolve hardened, she acted." While Ethan left for work unaware of the storm brewing in his own home, Clara drove to Boston with determination etched across her face. She had made an appointment with a man who specialized in secrets. His office sat above a pawn shop, the kind of place respectable people pretended not to notice. She walked up the narrow stairwell, her heels clicking like a countdown. Inside, the walls were lined with file cabinets, old photographs pinned to corkboards, names scribbled in thick marker. The detective, a wiry man named John Rourke, greeted her with suspicion in his eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, motioning her to a chair. "You were vague on the phone. What exactly do you want?" Clara sat down, crossing her legs with deliberate poise. She opened her purse, pulling out a manila envelope thick with cash. She slid it across the desk. "I want everything you can find on Serena Carter. Assets, properties, business dealings. I want to know who she really is." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "That's a heavy request. Privacy laws, corporations, offshore trusts, those don't open easily." Clara leaned forward, her voice like ice. "I don't care how heavy it is. She is hiding something, and I will not be made a fool. My family deserves what she's kept from us. I want results, not excuses." Rourke tapped the envelope with one finger, then pocketed it. "Money talks. You'll get what you're asking for, but let me warn you, once you start digging, you can't bury what you find." Clara's eyes sharpened. "That's the point." As she signed the contract, he placed in front of her. Her hand did not tremble. Her pen strokes were swift, final, ruthless. In that moment, she believed herself to be reclaiming her family's dignity, though what she was truly feeding was obsession. While Clara bound herself to secrecy and deceit in Boston, I was pushing a cart through a local supermarket in Providence. The automatic doors slid open to let in the morning air, carrying with it the faint smell of fresh bread from the bakery aisle. My list was simple: eggs, bread, apples, coffee beans. I liked the routine of it, the normalcy. I stopped by the produce section, pressing gently on an avocado to test its ripeness. A neighbor recognized me and waved. "Serena, good to see you. How was the wedding?" I smiled politely, keeping my voice light. "Lovely, very grand." No one in that store knew who I really was. To them, I was simply Serena Carter, the widow who drove an old sedan and lived quietly in her brick house. My groceries fit neatly into 2 bags. I paid in cash, thanked the cashier, and left without leaving a trace. That simplicity was my shield. It had kept me safe for years. At the very same hour, Clara was shaking hands with Rourke, sealing an agreement that would set her on a collision course with me. Her ambition and my discretion, running side by side, destined to meet head-on. She left the detective's office with her chin lifted high, as if victory was already hers. She dialed her mother on the way back. "It's done," she said curtly. Vivian's voice hummed with approval. "Good. That woman thinks silence makes her untouchable. We'll see how untouchable she feels when her secrets are laid bare." Clara tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "She humiliated me in front of everyone by keeping this hidden. I'll humiliate her by exposing it. If she has wealth, it will be ours. She will not laugh at me again." Back in Providence, I was unloading groceries onto the counter, lining apples in a neat row, when I felt a familiar heaviness settle over me. Years of protecting Ethan had taught me to sense storms before they broke. I could not hear Clara's voice in that car, nor Rourke's pen scratching across paper, but I knew something had shifted. Secrets never remain buried forever, and greed never sleeps. By late afternoon, Clara was back in the Mitchell estate, sitting at her vanity with papers spread across the surface, copies of the signed agreement, receipts for the payment she had made. She studied her reflection in the mirror, whispering to herself, "She thinks she's invisible. I'll drag her into the light." Her eyes glimmered not with fear, but with hunger. She remembered the looks at the wedding, the laughter that had turned into silence, and Harold's voice trembling when he recognized me. Clara replayed it over and over, each time fueling her fury. She could not accept being outplayed, not by a woman she had called a nobody. Meanwhile, my evening was as unremarkable as ever. I boiled water for tea, settled into the armchair by the window, and opened a book I had read dozens of times. Outside, children played on the sidewalk, their voices rising with laughter. The rhythm of normal life soothed me, even as I knew danger lurked beneath the surface. Clara stayed up long into the night, her mind restless, unable to sleep. She imagined what Rourke might uncover: bank accounts, offshore holdings, properties hidden under shell companies. The thought made her pulse quicken. She pictured herself standing in front of Ethan, presenting him with undeniable proof, forcing him to admit that I had lied. In her fantasies, she became the rightful heir to respect, while I was reduced to nothing more than a liar exposed. She whispered into the empty room, her words low and venomous. "You will not keep this from me, Serena. I will take what you've hidden. I will take everything." As the clock struck midnight, Clara finally lay back in bed, though her eyes never closed. Her determination had sharpened into obsession. She had crossed a line that night, one she could never retreat from, and though I could not yet see the path she had chosen, I felt it approaching like thunder in the distance. Clara stayed up long into the night, her mind restless, unable to sleep. She imagined what Rourke might uncover: bank accounts, offshore holdings, properties hidden under shell companies. The thought made her pulse quicken. She pictured herself standing in front of Ethan, presenting him with undeniable proof, forcing him to admit that I had lied. In her fantasies, she became the rightful heir to respect, while I was reduced to nothing more than a liar exposed. She whispered into the empty room, her words low and venomous. "You will not keep this from me, Serena. I will take what you've hidden. I will take everything." As the clock struck midnight, Clara finally lay back in bed, though her eyes never closed. Her determination had sharpened into obsession. She had crossed a line that night, one she could never retreat from, and though I could not yet see the path she had chosen, I felt it approaching like thunder in the distance. One woman fought for greed, clawing at illusions of wealth and legacy. The other, myself, fought for silence, for dignity, for the safety of a son who could not yet see the war closing in around him. That day marked the true beginning. Clara's investigation had started, and with it, the unraveling of everything I had worked so hard to protect. One woman fought for greed, clawing at illusions of wealth and legacy. The other, myself, fought for silence, for dignity, for the safety of a son who could not yet see the war closing in around him. That day marked the true beginning. Clara's investigation had started, and with it, the unraveling of everything I had worked so hard to protect. Ethan arrived at my house the following evening without calling first. His knock was sharp, hurried, the kind that carried impatience rather than courtesy. When I opened the door, his face was tight, his eyes restless, as if he had rehearsed a confrontation all the way from his apartment to my doorstep. I stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't sit. He paced the room like a man caught between two fires. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. "Why did I have to find out in the worst way possible, through Harold's face at my wedding and whispers in the crowd? Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I kept my tone calm, steady, even though the accusation cut deeper than he realized. "I have already told you. I stayed silent so you could become the man you are today, not the shadow of my wealth. Everything you've achieved is yours because you believed you had to fight for it." Ethan stopped pacing and turned toward me, his fists clenching. Ethan arrived at my house the following evening without calling first. His knock was sharp, hurried, the kind that carried impatience rather than courtesy. When I opened the door, his face was tight, his eyes restless, as if he had rehearsed a confrontation all the way from his apartment to my doorstep. I stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't sit. He paced the room like a man caught between two fires. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. "Why did I have to find out in the worst way possible, through Harold's face at my wedding and whispers in the crowd? Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I kept my tone calm, steady, even though the accusation cut deeper than he realized. "I have already told you. I stayed silent so you could become the man you are today, not the shadow of my wealth. Everything you've achieved is yours because you believed you had to fight for it." Ethan stopped pacing and turned toward me, his fists clenching. "That's not good enough anymore. Clara says you've been manipulating everything. She says you didn't just hide money. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, controlling people, controlling me." The venom in Clara's words was already inside him. I could hear it twisting his doubt. I leaned forward, my voice firm. "What strings? Tell me exactly what she said." "She said you bought Harold's company not to save it, but to humiliate him. She said you kept it hidden because you wanted to watch his family struggle. She said you're not just protecting me, you're orchestrating everything, deciding who wins and who loses, while pretending you're some quiet widow." I let out a slow breath. "And you believe her?" He hesitated, but the silence between us was answer enough. I stood straighter, my voice sharp. "Ethan, listen to me. Clara wants you to doubt me. That's her weapon. If she can make you believe I'm a threat, then she becomes the victim in your eyes." "That's not good enough anymore. Clara says you've been manipulating everything. She says you didn't just hide money. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, controlling people, controlling me." The venom in Clara's words was already inside him. I could hear it twisting his doubt. I leaned forward, my voice firm. "What strings? Tell me exactly what she said." "She said you bought Harold's company not to save it, but to humiliate him. She said you kept it hidden because you wanted to watch his family struggle. She said you're not just protecting me, you're orchestrating everything, deciding who wins and who loses, while pretending you're some quiet widow." I let out a slow breath. "And you believe her?" He hesitated, but the silence between us was answer enough. I stood straighter, my voice sharp. "Ethan, listen to me. Clara wants you to doubt me. That's her weapon. If she can make you believe I'm a threat, then she becomes the victim in your eyes. And you, desperate to protect her, will turn against your own mother. That's what she wants." He shook his head violently. "Don't make this about Clara. This is about you and your lies. You let me think you were scraping by while you were building an empire. You watched me struggle, watched me sacrifice, and you never once thought I deserved to know the truth." "I thought you deserved a chance at dignity," I snapped back. "Do you think it was easy for me, watching you wear yourself thin while I had the means to erase every obstacle? Do you think I didn't want to help you? Every day I had to fight the urge to hand you a check, to solve every problem for you. But I didn't, because I knew if I did, you would never learn your own strength. I chose the harder road for both of us." His voice broke with frustration. "But now what am I supposed to think? Clara says you're dangerous, that you've been lying not just to me, but to everyone. She says maybe you can't even be trusted. And you, desperate to protect her, will turn against your own mother. That's what she wants." He shook his head violently. "Don't make this about Clara. This is about you and your lies. You let me think you were scraping by while you were building an empire. You watched me struggle, watched me sacrifice, and you never once thought I deserved to know the truth." "I thought you deserved a chance at dignity," I snapped back. "Do you think it was easy for me, watching you wear yourself thin while I had the means to erase every obstacle? Do you think I didn't want to help you? Every day I had to fight the urge to hand you a check, to solve every problem for you. But I didn't, because I knew if I did, you would never learn your own strength. I chose the harder road for both of us. His voice broke with frustration. But now what am I supposed to think? Clara says you're dangerous, that you've been lying not just to me, but to everyone. She says maybe you can't even be trusted. The words stung, but I forced myself not to flinch. Clara is afraid, Ethan. Afraid because she saw for the first time that she cannot control me. She is building a wall of lies around you, so you will stand on her side when the ground shakes. You need to decide if you believe her fear or my truth. He turned away, pressing his palms against his temples. His breathing came fast. I could see the battle raging inside him, his loyalty to me, the years of trust, weighed against Clara's whispering voice in the dark. He was a man torn apart, and I hated the woman who had planted that division. He spun back toward me, his tone raw. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? If you think I'm so strong, why did you never believe I could handle the truth? Because strength is not given, I said, my voice iron. It is forged. You only know yourself when you have to fight without a net. If I had told you sooner, you would have leaned on my wealth instead of your will. I will never apologize for letting you earn your life. The silence between us was thick. Ethan's chest heaved as if every word I spoke pressed against him like a weight. Finally, he whispered, I don't know who to believe anymore. My wife says one thing, my mother says another. You both want me to choose. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. I want you to see, not to choose blindly, not to follow out of guilt or fear. I want you to look at actions, not words. Who stood by you when you had nothing? Who raised you without asking for gratitude? And who mocks, manipulates, and schemes the moment she thinks there is money to be taken? His throat worked as he swallowed, his face torn. I can't do this. Not now. He turned toward the door, his movements restless, unsettled. At the threshold he paused, his back still to me. If you've been honest, prove it. Show me everything. If Clara's wrong, give me something to silence her. I said nothing, because I knew the proof would come soon enough. Lies have a way of unraveling on their own. He left, the door slamming behind him, leaving me alone in the silence of the red brick house. For the first time since the wedding, I felt the true weight of the war ahead. It was not just Clara I would have to face. It was the doubt she had planted inside my son, and that doubt was already growing roots. Clara called me 2 days later. Her tone was unusually formal, as if she were inviting me to a business negotiation rather than a conversation between family. She asked to meet at an office space she had arranged downtown, one of those polished glass buildings in Providence, where lawyers and accountants kept their rooms of secrets. I agreed, though every instinct told me her motives were far from clean. When I arrived, Clara was already seated at the long conference table, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She had dressed in a tailored suit, far too severe for someone so young, her hair pinned back as if every strand was meant to signal control. She gestured toward the chair opposite her. Serena, thank you for coming. I sat, folding my hands on the polished wood. Clara, what is this about? She straightened, her eyes glittering with determination. It's about family, about doing what's right now that we are one. I've been thinking, what we need is a structure, something formal, something that ensures everyone benefits fairly, a family trust. I said nothing at first, only raising an eyebrow. She mistook my silence for interest, so she pressed on. It's simple, she explained, sliding a document across the table. You place your assets into a trust. Ethan, myself, and you would serve as trustees. That way, we make decisions together. Family means sharing, Serena. You owe it to us now that we are connected. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, almost smug. I let the silence stretch until she shifted in her seat. Then I spoke, calm and deliberate. Family means respect, Clara. And you mocked me as a nobody in front of 200 guests. You humiliated me with a smile. Tell me, does that sound like respect to you? She stiffened, but her lips curved into a brittle smile. I was nervous. Weddings are overwhelming. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. You pointed at me, Clara. You said I was nothing. That was no accident. That was who you are. Her eyes flashed with irritation. Then prove me wrong. Show me that you're not selfish. What good is all that money if it sits in silence? Families like ours are meant to build legacies. My parents built Mitchell Holdings, and you stripped it from us in secret. At least this way. It comes back where it belongs. I held her gaze, unblinking. Mitchell Holdings collapsed because of arrogance and greed. I bought it to save workers' jobs, not to entertain your illusions of grandeur. Your father failed, Clara. I didn't strip it from you. He handed it to me by destroying it himself. She clenched her fists on the table. You think you're so much better. You sit in your little brick house, pretending to be humble, while you hide everything. If you truly cared about Ethan, if you cared about me as his wife, you would share. I let her words hang in the air, then answered with precision. If you cared about Ethan, you wouldn't see me as a bank. You would see me as his mother, a woman who raised him without asking for a single thing in return. Family trusts are built on trust, and you've shown me nothing but contempt. Clara's voice cracked under the weight of her frustration. You can't keep this all to yourself forever. People will find out. Secrets never stay buried. Don't you want to be remembered as generous instead of selfish? I stood, slowly, letting my chair scrape against the floor. My voice was ice. Generosity is not signing away everything I built to a woman who despises me. Generosity was raising Ethan to stand on his own, giving him values instead of dollars. That is the legacy I care about, and you will not touch it. Clara's composure faltered. Her cheeks flushed, her jaw trembled, but she forced her mask back into place. Then you leave me no choice. I will find another way. I gathered my bag, straightening my posture. Find whatever you like. Just remember one thing. You declared war the night you called me a nobody. You should have chosen your words more carefully. As I walked out of the office, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. Clara believed she had cornered me with her proposal. What she didn't realize was that her desperation had already exposed her weakness. The war between us had officially moved from whispers to open confrontation, and neither of us would walk away unscathed. I arranged the meeting on neutral ground, a small conference room at the library near downtown Providence. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of place that demanded quiet. Clara arrived late, striding in with a look of disdain, as if she were walking into enemy territory. She sat opposite me, tossing her purse onto the table. "You called me here," she said sharply. "What is it this time? Another lecture about respect?" Without answering, I slid a thick envelope across the polished wood. She frowned, pulled it open, and froze. Dozens of pages spilled out. Credit card statements, loan records, overdue notices. Each sheet bore her name in bold print. I watched her eyes dart across the numbers. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. New credit lines opened weeks before the wedding. Her face flushed. She slammed the papers back onto the table. "You think this scares me?" Her voice was low, shaking with rage. "These are just numbers, paper. They don't define me." She leaned forward, her tone venomous. "I'll get what I deserve, Serena, whether you like it or not." I kept my voice calm, steady as steel. Deserve? Deserve is earned. What I see here is recklessness. You planned to dig into my life while burying yourself in debt. You wanted access to my money, not to protect Ethan, not to build a future, but to cover the holes you created with your own arrogance. Clara's lip curled. You hide behind modest dresses in that pathetic little house. You want people to think you're humble, but you're nothing but a miser hoarding what could change all our lives. You think your silence makes you noble, but all it makes you is selfish. Before I could respond, a sound at the doorway caught my attention. Ethan stood there, halfway inside, frozen. Neither of us had noticed him arrive. His eyes locked onto the papers scattered across the table, then shifted to Clara's face. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Clara spun around, her mask faltering. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like." I didn't move. "He deserves the truth. Let him see what I've just shown you." I pushed the stack of bills toward him. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes scanning the top page. I watched the blood drain from his face as he flipped through line after line of mounting debt. Clara tried to snatch the papers back, but Ethan's grip tightened. "These are your accounts," he said flatly. "Thousands of dollars. Why didn't you tell me?" Clara's voice cracked. "I was going to handle it. You don't understand." He cut her off. "Handle it? By lying? By opening more credit lines before the wedding? By marrying me and hoping my family would erase this mess for you?" Clara's composure shattered. Her words tumbled out, bitter and desperate. "What did you expect me to do? Live small forever? Watch my parents' estate crumble while you pretend we're middle class? I won't. I refuse to. If your mother has money, then it belongs to us now. That's how families work." The room went silent. Ethan's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw the veil lift from his face. He had doubted me before, Clara's poison seeping into his mind, but now he saw the raw hunger in her eyes, the entitlement dripping from her words. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The evidence lay between us, undeniable. Ethan dropped the papers onto the table as though they burned his hands. His voice was low, dangerous. "You used me." Clara's voice wavered. "No, I married you because... She faltered, searching for words she couldn't find. "Because you thought I was your ticket back to the life you lost," he finished for her. His expression hardened, grief mixing with fury. Clara reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "Ethan, please, you have to believe me. I just wanted security. I just wanted—" "You wanted my mother's money," he said coldly, "and you mocked her as a nobody while you schemed behind my back." She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. The silence was heavier than any denial she could have offered. I rose, gathering the remaining papers into a neat stack. My voice was calm, each word deliberate. "Ethan, now you see. She doesn't love you for who you are. She only loves what she thought you would bring her." Clara's eyes flashed with panic. "Don't listen to her. She's turning you against me. She's the manipulator, not me." But Ethan didn't answer. His silence was louder than her screams. He looked at me with a new understanding, then back at Clara with something close to pity. I placed the envelope into my bag and turned toward the door. "This conversation is over. The truth is on the table. What you choose to do with it is your decision." Ethan didn't stop me as I left the room. The last image I carried with me was Clara, standing in the center of the conference room, her mask shattered, her desperation naked, while Ethan stared at her as though he no longer recognized the woman he had married. And for the first time, I knew the cracks in her facade had begun to spread, visible now, not just to me, but to the very man she thought she had secured. Vivian's call came the next morning. Her voice was smooth, dripping with false politeness. "Serena, there's no need for all this tension in the family. Come by the estate this afternoon." I knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Still, I agreed. Some battles must be faced head-on. The Mitchell estate looked even colder in daylight. Its white columns gleamed, but the ivy on the walls had grown unchecked, a reminder of neglect hidden behind grandeur. I was escorted into the parlor, a cavernous room filled with portraits of ancestors staring down from gilded frames. Vivian sat at the center of the room, draped in a silk blouse, her pearls large and ostentatious. Harold sat to her right, quiet, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. "Serena," Vivian said with a smile that was all edges, "I'm glad you came." She gestured toward the chair across from her. I sat, my spine straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Vivian leaned forward, her voice low and cutting. "You know, people of true class don't hide behind modest dresses and cheap pearls. They don't play at humility while secretly pulling strings. Real class is shown through openness, generosity, and legacy. Don't you think?" I met her gaze without flinching. True class, Vivian, is not measured by the size of one's pearls. It's measured by the way one treats others. Mocking someone as a nobody in front of 200 guests. That is the opposite of class. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. She smoothed it back into place. You misunderstand. That was nerves. Clara can be impulsive, but what matters now is how we move forward. You've built something extraordinary. Surely you don't mean to keep it all locked away. You married into this family once, and now our children are married. That creates responsibilities. Harold finally stirred, his voice rough, reluctant. Serena, no one denies what you've accomplished. But when I saw you that night, I realized I had misjudged you years ago. You are not just some widow. You are a force, and with that kind of power, there comes duty, responsibility to family. I turned to him, my tone sharp. Responsibility? Harold, your company was collapsing under your mismanagement. Hundreds of employees would have lost their jobs if I hadn't intervened. I saved what you nearly destroyed. My responsibility was to them, not to your ego. His face flushed. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unable to look me in the eye. Vivian reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly before turning back to me. You see, she said smoothly, that's exactly what I mean. You think in terms of control, of power. You say you saved the company, but really you claimed it. You took what was ours. And now you sit in your little brick house pretending to be modest while holding a fortune that should be shared. You may fool the public with your simplicity, but you cannot fool us. I let her words hang in the air before answering. My voice was steady, cold as steel. I have never pretended. I live quietly because I choose to, not because I am ashamed, and not because I owe anyone an explanation. I do not hoard. I invest, I build, and I protect. That is what I have always done, and what I will continue to do. Vivian's mask slipped then. Her smile thinned into a sneer. You think you can stand above us, but you're already entangled. My daughter is your son's wife. That binds us together. And when one branch of a family tree thrives, the others deserve to share in that growth. Isn't that what family means? I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. Family means loyalty. Family means respect. What your daughter showed me was contempt. What you are showing me now is entitlement. Neither earns a share of what I built. For the first time, Vivian's composure cracked. Her eyes narrowed. Her voice sharpened. You cannot keep Ethan blind forever. He already doubts you. He already questions what you've done. Sooner or later, he will stand with his wife, not with you. And when that day comes, you will regret not having been more generous. I stood, my chair sliding back across the floor with a hard scrape. If Ethan ever turns against me, it will not be because of the truth. It will be because of the poison whispered into his ear by people who see me only as a vault to be broken open. I will never regret refusing to feed greed, but you, Vivian, will regret underestimating me. Harold shifted again, his voice low. Serena, perhaps Vivian's words were harsh, but think of appearances. Think of the community. What will people say when they learn you concealed such wealth while letting your own family stumble? Perhaps you should consider a gesture, something to show goodwill, a donation, a foundation, something in the Mitchell name. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. I looked at Harold, his face still heavy with shame, and said clearly, The Mitchell name survives because of me, not because of you, not because of Vivian, and certainly not because of Clara. If you want goodwill, earn it. My fortune is not a bandage for your pride. Vivian's cheeks burned red. She rose halfway from her chair, her voice trembling with fury. You cannot speak to us like this. I stepped closer, my voice firm, unwavering. I just did, and I will again, if necessary. I turned toward the door, my pulse steady, my resolve unshaken. As I reached for the handle, I looked back once more. You called me here to intimidate me. Instead, you've shown me exactly how afraid you are. And that fear tells me one thing: your house of cards is already collapsing. I left them sitting in silence, the portraits of their ancestors staring down like silent judges. For the first time, I realized the Mitchells were not just greedy. They were desperate. And desperation is far more dangerous than greed alone. Clara's ambition had always been dangerous, but that week she crossed a line she could never uncross. She scheduled a meeting with Marcus Webb, a lawyer known for his aggressive tactics in family disputes. His office overlooked Boston Harbor, sleek and clinical, with certificates covering the walls like trophies. Clara arrived dressed in another sharp suit, her expression carved in determination. Marcus leaned back in his chair, scanning the notes she had handed him. "You're asking me to file a petition alleging that your mother-in-law concealed marital assets. That's a serious claim, Clara. You understand what that means?" Clara's voice was cool, practiced. She built her fortune in secrecy. She misled everyone, including my husband. By law, spouses are entitled to disclosure of family assets. She never disclosed. That's concealment. I want a petition filed, and I want it loud enough to shake her world. Marcus studied her carefully. This isn't about protecting your marriage. This is about access. If I file this, we'll be forcing her to open her books. Every account, every trust, every holding. Are you prepared for the fallout? Clara smiled, brittle and sharp. Fallout is her problem, not mine. File it. Marcus tapped his pen against the desk, then nodded. Very well. I'll draft the petition. But understand something. If she can prove full compliance, you walk away with nothing but humiliation. Clara's eyes hardened. She won't risk public exposure. She'll settle. She always hides behind her image of modesty. This will force her to pay. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. Once I file, this becomes public record. It will spread fast. You'd better be ready for the headlines. Clara's lips curled into a grin. Let them spread. By the time she finishes defending herself, she'll wish she had just given me what I asked for. The papers were signed the next morning. Marcus filed a formal petition in family court, alleging deliberate concealment of marital assets with potential harm to her son's financial interests. It was carefully worded, not wild enough to collapse under scrutiny, but sharp enough to slice into my privacy. I didn't hear about it immediately. For 3 days, I carried on with my routine. I met with my financial advisor, checked on one of my real estate projects in Providence, and even hosted a quiet dinner with 2 old friends. Life moved on, calm on the surface. Then the phone rang. It was James Harrison, an attorney I trusted in Boston. His voice carried the weight of bad news. "Serena, I thought you should hear this from me before it hits the press. A petition's been filed in Suffolk County Family Court. The claimant is Marcus Webb on behalf of Clara Mitchell. They're alleging concealment of assets, demanding full disclosure of your holdings." I froze for only a second, then straightened. My voice came out steady. "They've filed officially?" "Yes," James confirmed. "It's aggressive, but not baseless enough to be dismissed outright. They're trying to drag you into discovery. It's a play for leverage. Webb knows if he can put you under the microscope, you'll be tempted to settle quietly rather than expose everything." I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Providence street below. Children rode bicycles. Neighbors carried groceries. The ordinary world continued, unaware of the storm brewing over my name. My hand tightened around the phone. So this is how far they're willing to go. James hesitated. "Serena, what do you want to do? We can challenge the filing, delay proceedings, or prepare to disclose under court order. But if you're asking my advice, I'm not afraid of disclosure," I cut in. "My records are clean. Every account is legal, every investment documented. They think I hide in shadows, but the truth is stronger than their lies." There was silence on the line. Then James said, "Then we'll fight." I ended the call and stood in the center of my kitchen, the afternoon light streaming across the red brick walls. My heart beat steady, not with fear, but with resolve. Clara thought she had cornered me. She thought legal threats would make me bend, but she had underestimated what I had built. I whispered to myself, each word a promise. If they want war, I'll give them truth. That night I pulled out the locked box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents, records, proof of every decision Tom and I had ever made. The patent sale, the reinvestments, the property deeds, the stock certificates. A map of discipline, patience, and vision. Nothing reckless, nothing dirty. As I laid them out across the table, I felt no shame, only clarity. They wanted to drag me into the light. Very well. But when the light touched them, it would burn away the illusions they had wrapped themselves in. For Clara, this was a game of greed. For me, it was a defense of dignity, and if she thought I would be broken by a courtroom, she had chosen the wrong opponent. The Mitchell estate glowed with chandeliers that evening, the kind of light designed to flatter silk gowns and polished shoes, but beneath it was something darker. The family had invited dozens of relatives, old friends, and business associates. It was supposed to look like a celebration, yet the atmosphere reminded me of a political rally more than a gathering. Everyone eyed one another with caution, their smiles thin, their voices clipped. Conversations died the moment someone new stepped into earshot. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, quietly observing. The crystal clinked, the orchestra played softly, but under it all, I felt the tension pulsing like an underground current. Clara sat 2 seats down, radiant in a crimson dress, her hair styled to perfection. Her smile, however, was tight, too deliberate. She whispered to Vivian throughout the dinner, both of them glancing my way as if rehearsing their next move. I knew the moment was coming. Halfway through the main course, Clara suddenly stood. The scrape of her chair against the floor cut through the music like a blade. Glasses stopped midway to lips. Forks froze. Even the violinist faltered. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Serena has been hiding her fortune. She secretly bought my father's company. She lied to us all. A ripple tore through the room. Guests gasped, their heads turning toward me. Some whispered behind hands. Others stared openly, waiting for me to crumble. The orchestra stopped completely. I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch. My chair moved back with a calm precision that contrasted Clara's outburst. I looked at her, then at the rows of faces now locked on me. "You speak of lies, Clara," I said, my tone even, carrying across the room. "But lies require intent to deceive. What I have done openly in boardrooms, with contracts signed and stamped. Your father's company was not stolen. It was purchased, legally, ethically, and documented for all to see." Clara's face flushed crimson to match her dress. "You concealed it. You let us all believe you were some modest widow while you pulled the strings from the shadows." I tilted my head, my voice tightening. "Concealment is not the same as privacy. I owe no one an announcement of my bank accounts or investments. What I owe is honesty when asked directly, and I have always answered truthfully to those who deserved an answer." Gasps stirred again, louder this time. Some guests nodded faintly. Others exchanged glances. Clara's confidence flickered, but she pressed on. "You did it to humiliate us. You wanted to watch my family suffer while you lived in comfort. You wanted revenge." The accusation hung in the air. I stepped closer, every eye following me. "Your family suffered because of choices your father made. I did not bankrupt Mitchell Holdings. Harold's overreach did. I didn't mock anyone at a wedding reception. You did. The only humiliation in this room tonight is your own, Clara, brought on by arrogance and entitlement." A murmur spread among the guests. I could see it in their faces, doubt shifting, sympathy edging toward me. Ethan, seated near the middle, looked torn apart. His eyes darted between us, but for the first time, I saw something breaking inside him as he listened. Clara's mask cracked. Her voice rose, sharper, shriller. "Don't listen to her. She's spinning this to look like the victim. She's nothing but a miser with too much money and no soul." I laid my hand gently on the stack of papers I had brought, resting quietly beside my plate. My voice cut through her shouting, calm and absolute. "These are the records of your recent debts, Clara. Credit cards opened weeks before your wedding, loans hidden from Ethan, payments overdue. Do you want me to pass them around, so every guest here can see who is truly living a lie?" The silence that followed was crushing. Vivian's face went pale. Harold shifted uncomfortably, his eyes cast downward. Guests leaned in, whispering urgently to one another. Clara's jaw trembled. For a moment, she looked like a child cornered. Then she snapped, her voice breaking. "I just wanted a better life." The room erupted, not in applause, but in disgust. Gasps, mutters, sharp intakes of breath. One of Harold's cousins shook his head. A family friend whispered, "She married for money." Another voice muttered, "Shameful." People began to rise from their seats, some shaking their heads, others deliberately turning away from her. The orchestra quietly set their instruments down, unwilling to play another note. I stood tall, letting the wave of judgment crash over Clara. She had wanted spectacle. She had wanted to expose me. Instead, she had exposed herself. I turned toward the guests, my tone deliberate. I have lived my life with dignity, choosing privacy over show, discipline over waste. If anyone here wishes to question that, I welcome it. But do not mistake my quiet life for weakness, and do not mistake Clara's desperation for truth. The parlor fell utterly still. Clara sank back into her chair, her shoulders rigid, her eyes blazing with humiliation. No one came to her defense, not even Vivian. Harold sat frozen, his shame written plain across his face. The family gathering had begun as their stage to shame me. By the end, it had become their own undoing. I left the estate that night knowing one thing. Clara had tried to win in front of an audience, but she had forgotten that an audience can turn, and once it does, the echoes of disgrace last far longer than applause. I rose to my feet, slowly, deliberately. The room hushed at once, all eyes fixed on me. My fingers brushed over the leather folder I had brought, resting on the table like an unspoken promise. Clara had demanded exposure. She had demanded spectacle. Very well. I opened the folder with precision, sliding out the first sheet. My voice carried across the parlor, sharp and unwavering. Clara accuses me of hiding, but what she has hidden is far worse. These, I lifted the paper, are invoices from a private investigation firm in Boston, paid in her name, hired to dig into my life. Gasps broke through the silence. Clara's face blanched. I placed the invoices down for all to see, then pulled out the next piece. And this? An email sent to her closest friend just months before she met Ethan. Her exact words, "I'm done dating poor men. I need a man with stable wealth." I let the words sink into the air. They were ugly, cynical, dripping with greed. I watched as heads turned toward Ethan, pity mixing with anger in their eyes. His hands trembled against the edge of the table. Clara lunged forward, her voice shrill. "That's taken out of context. Everyone says things when they're frustrated." I cut her off, my voice calm but slicing. "Context? You didn't stop there. You pursued my son like he was a prize to be won. You whispered poison about me, hoping to wedge him away. And when that wasn't enough, you dug into my life with investigators and lawyers, trying to build a case for control." I slid more papers onto the table, copies of her credit card statements, loans, and the retainer agreement with Marcus Webb. "Here are the debts you concealed from Ethan. Here is the contract with your attorney, filed days before you married him. You weren't building a marriage, Clara. You were building a scheme." The silence deepened. You could hear the creak of chairs as guests shifted uncomfortably. Vivian's pearl necklace rattled slightly as she pressed her hand against her throat. Harold stared at the documents, shame etched into his features. Ethan's voice finally broke the silence. It was low, raw, as if ripped from his chest. "Clara, is this true?" Clara's mask cracked. Her lips quivered, her eyes darting from face to face. "Ethan, Listen, it wasn't like that. I was scared. I just wanted security, a future for us both." But Ethan shook his head. "No. You wanted my mother's money. You wanted her life's work. And you mocked her as a nobody while planning to strip her of everything. Tell me, was there ever a moment you loved me? Or was I just convenient?" Clara's face hardened. Desperation turned to fury. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do. My family lost everything. I carried the weight of their failure. Do you know what it's like to grow up with everything and then watch it slip away? I wasn't going to settle for less. Her confession hung in the air, naked and venomous. The guests recoiled. Someone whispered harshly, "She used him." Another muttered, "Shameless." I placed my hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. My words were meant for the entire room. We all endure loss. We all face hardship. But true character is revealed not by what we grasp for, but by what we honor. I built my life after Tom died, not by leeching off others, but by discipline, patience, and quiet resilience. That is the difference between us. The hall was still as stone. Clara stood alone in her rage, her own words condemning her more than anything I could have shown. The weight of judgment pressed in from every side. Even those who once whispered in her favor now turned their faces away. Her voice cracked one last time, brittle with panic. "You all think she's so noble, but she lied too. She kept this hidden." I met her gaze, steady and unyielding. Privacy is not deception. Protecting my son from predators like you was my duty. And tonight, that duty is complete. You wanted the truth. Here it is, in front of everyone you sought to impress. Look around, Clara. This is what the truth looks like. The room remained frozen in silence, every eye on her. No laughter, no applause, only the sound of her downfall echoing through the parlor she had hoped to command. I closed the folder, not with triumph, but with finality. The evidence had spoken. Clara had condemned herself. And for the first time, the Mitchell estate stood in the light of truth, harsh, unforgiving, and unforgettable. The room was silent for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that burns deeper than any insult. Then, from somewhere near the middle of the table, a voice broke through. It was one of Harold's cousins, an older man with a graying beard. His words landed like a hammer. "She married Ethan for money." The whisper became a wave. Guests turned their heads toward Clara, their faces twisted with disgust. A woman in a satin gown shook her head, muttering to her husband, "I knew it. Always too polished, too desperate." Another relative murmured, "Poor Ethan. He never saw it coming." Chairs scraped against the polished floor as several guests stood. A couple excused themselves loudly, their voices dripping with judgment. "We won't sit here and watch this circus." They walked out, leaving the door swinging behind them. Clara's face turned crimson, then pale. Her lips quivered as she tried to steady her voice, but it broke, trembling and weak. "I just wanted a better life." The words, instead of defending her, condemned her further. Murmurs of disapproval rippled across the room. Someone near the window hissed, "At any cost?" Another voice answered, "She used him. Shameless." Clara's mask shattered. Tears streaked her carefully painted makeup. She clutched the back of her chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice cracking. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to watch your family's name fall. I had no choice." But no one offered comfort. No hand reached out. Vivian covered her face with both palms, her shoulders shaking. Whether from shame or fury, I could not tell. Harold sat rigid, his head bowed, the lines of regret carved deep into his forehead. The mighty Mitchells, who once sneered down at me, now looked broken in front of their own kin. Clara's sobs grew louder, turning into screams. I tried to save us. Don't you see? I thought if I could tie us to her wealth, everything would be restored." She gestured wildly toward me, as if I were the villain in her downfall. But the guests weren't fooled. They looked at her with narrowed eyes, their disdain clear. One man whispered to another, "This is worse than greed. This is desperation disguised as ambition." A woman shook her head. She destroyed her own dignity. Clara collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Her image, carefully crafted, polished, ambitious, was gone. What remained was raw, ugly, and exposed. I stood still, watching. My voice, when it came, was measured, calm, and cold. A better life cannot be built on lies. Dignity is not purchased. Respect is not demanded. It is earned." No one clapped, no one smiled, but the silence that followed was heavier than applause. It was the silence of judgment, of a community turning its back on the one who betrayed their trust. I looked at Ethan. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He saw his wife not as the woman he thought he had married, but as a stranger unveiled before the world. Vivian lowered her hands at last, her eyes red. She did not defend her daughter. Harold's head remained bowed, his silence louder than any words. Clara continued to weep, her cries echoing through the grand hall. But no one moved to console her. She was alone, publicly disgraced, her schemes burned away under the weight of truth. That night, it wasn't me who stood trial in the Mitchell estate. It was Clara. And the verdict was delivered not by a judge, but by the very people whose approval she had craved most. She had wanted to climb into power through spectacle. Instead, spectacle became her downfall. The air inside the Mitchell estate had turned into ice. Clara's sobs echoed through the grand parlor, but no one moved to comfort her. Ethan stood frozen in place, his hands balled into fists, his jaw trembling. The shame of the evening, the humiliation, the endless lies, everything bore down on him until he could barely breathe. Then his voice broke through, cutting sharper than anything Clara had heard all night. "You didn't love me. You loved what you thought I had. We're done." The words struck like a gavel, final and merciless. Clara staggered forward, her mascara-stained face lifted toward him. "No, Ethan, please, don't say that. I made mistakes, yes, but I did it for us, for our future. You can't just throw this away." But Ethan's eyes no longer softened at her excuses. He stepped back, shaking his head. "Our future? You mean your debts, your schemes, your hunger for a life you didn't earn? You didn't marry me. You married the fortune you thought my mother kept hidden. That's not love, Clara. That's theft disguised as devotion." Her voice cracked, raw and desperate. "I can change. I'll stop everything. The lawyers, the investigations. Just give me another chance, please." Ethan's face hardened, his features etched with pain and resolve. "No, I gave you every chance. I believed your lies because I wanted to believe you cared. But tonight, I saw who you really are. And there's no going back." Clara reached for his arm, but he pulled away sharply, as if her touch itself had become poison. "Don't, Clara. Don't touch me." I moved to Ethan's side. My presence was calm, solid, unyielding. I placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, and for the first time that night, his trembling stopped. He glanced at me, and in his eyes I saw the boy he once was, the boy I had raised, who was now learning a bitter truth about the cost of betrayal. "We're leaving," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "Ethan, don't do this," Clara wailed. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into her chair, clutching the table's edge as if it could anchor her crumbling world. "You can't walk away from me, not after everything." But Ethan had already turned. Together, he and I walked across the parlor. The crowd parted for us in silence, their faces a mixture of sympathy and judgment. Every step echoed, deliberate and final. Behind us, Clara's cries grew louder, more frantic. "Ethan, please, don't leave me!" But he did not look back. Neither did I. When we reached the grand doors, Ethan opened them wide, letting the cold night air rush in. The chandeliers still glowed behind us, but the Mitchell name, once carried with pride, now hung in disgrace. We stepped into the night, leaving Clara to drown in the ruins of her own making. In the days that followed, the scandal spread like wildfire. Word of Clara's outburst, her debts, her confessions, reached far beyond the estate walls. The whispers became headlines in hushed social circles, each retelling sharpening her downfall. She was no longer the ambitious daughter-in-law climbing into high society. She was the cautionary tale, greed and vanity exposed for all to see. Ethan filed for divorce quietly, decisively. The process was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Clara walked away with nothing, no settlement, no sympathy, no dignity. She returned to her parents' house, a shadow of the woman who once stood at the altar declaring herself a queen. Even Vivian, once her staunch defender, avoided her gaze in public. Harold, still drowning in his own shame, spoke little of her at all. For Ethan, the pain cut deep, but it also freed him. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my red brick home in Providence, he turned to me. I thought losing her would destroy me, but I realize now what I lost was an illusion. What I gained is clarity. I nodded, sipping my tea, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the lawn. Clarity comes at a cost, but it is always worth more than living blind. He exhaled, his shoulders finally easing. She's gone, Mom, and for the first time, I'm glad. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently, then let her go. And remember this, love built on greed collapses under truth, but love built on respect never falters. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt the weight of months lift from my chest. Clara had tried to strip us of dignity, to drag us through shame and deceit, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. She was left behind, empty-handed, disgraced, her cries echoing in a grand hall that no longer belonged to her. We, however, walked forward, together, stronger, free. Autumn had settled over Providence, painting the streets in shades of amber and rust. I sat on the porch of my red brick house, a steaming cup of tea warming my palms. The air was crisp, the kind that carries both the bite of cold and the comfort of stillness. Leaves spiraled down from the old oak tree at the edge of my yard, scattering across the walkway like golden confetti. After months of storms, legal battles, public exposure, heartbreak, peace finally returned to my life, quiet but powerful. The phone rang inside, its chime breaking the rhythm of falling leaves. I set my tea on the railing and answered. Ethan's voice came through, steady, clear, carrying the weight of a man who had endured fire and come out stronger. "Mom," he said, pausing as if the word itself meant more now than ever. "Now I understand. Dignity is worth more than wealth." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink into me. For so long, I had hidden the truth to protect him. For so long, I had carried the burden of silence. Hearing him say those words was like releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My voice came low, calm, and full of warmth. "Respect is the only fortune you can't lose." There was silence on the line, but it was not heavy. It was filled with meaning. I could almost picture him, sitting in his apartment, perhaps with a book left open on the table, finally breathing free of Clara's shadow. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "for everything." I thought back to the path that had brought us here. The humiliation at the wedding when Clara had raised her glass and declared me a nobody. The laughter that followed, sharp and cruel, until Harold's gasp revealed the truth. The investigations, the lawyers, the accusations meant to strip me of my dignity. The night Clara's schemes collapsed under their own weight, leaving her sobbing before a room of peers who would never forget her disgrace. I remembered Ethan's pain, his doubt, his struggle caught between loyalty to his wife and the truth of his mother. Those moments had cut me deeper than Clara's cruelty ever could. Yet now, months later, I heard in his voice the strength I always knew he carried. "Ethan," I said softly, "sometimes life tests us with fire. It burns away what is false and leaves only what is real. Painful, yes, but necessary." He let out a long breath, steady this time. "I see that now. She was chasing wealth. You were living with dignity, and I almost lost sight of which mattered more." "You didn't lose it," I said firmly. "You found it, and that makes you stronger than before." We spoke a while longer, not about Clara, not about the Mitchells, but about life, about the simplicity of cooking dinner, about a book he had discovered, about a friend he had reconnected with. His laughter was lighter now, unchained. When the call ended, I returned to the porch, cradling my tea once more. The sky was fading into twilight. streaked with violet and gold. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and rain. I thought of Clara then, not with bitterness, but with a quiet finality. She had left town after the divorce, her reputation in tatters, her pockets empty. She had chased wealth with reckless hunger, and it had consumed her. She became a lesson, not just for Ethan, but for everyone who had witnessed her downfall. Harold and Vivian no longer held their heads high in social circles. The Mitchell name was whispered with pity rather than envy. And though I felt no triumph in their ruin, I understood the symmetry of it. Pride built on illusions always collapses under the weight of truth. I lifted my cup, letting the steam curl against my face. In that moment, I felt no need to hide who I was anymore. I was not just a widow in a modest dress, not just the woman people overlooked. I was Serena, who had built a fortune not to flaunt, but to preserve dignity, who had endured betrayal and shame and still chosen to stand with grace. The street was quiet now. A neighbor walked by, waving politely. I returned the gesture with a smile. There was no need for grandeur, no need for performance. My life was measured not by headlines or scandals, but by the quiet respect I carried within and passed to my son. As the first stars pricked the evening sky, I felt a calm settle deep in my bones. The battles were behind me, the lessons endured, and the future stretched ahead, not glittering with wealth, but glowing with peace. I whispered into the stillness, almost to myself. Respect is the only fortune you can't lose. The words lingered in the air, carried away by the wind, soft yet unbreakable. I smiled, serene, as the last light faded. The music of crickets rose in the background, gentle and unhurried. My tea had cooled, but I held it anyway, savoring the warmth. For the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I needed to be, at peace, dignified, unshaken.